The iron bars slammed shut behind Helena Brennan with a sound that echoed through her bones, and she knew in that moment her life had changed forever. Though she had done nothing wrong except be in the wrong place at the wrong time when the Wells Fargo stage was robbed outside North Platte, Nebraska. Sheriff Ethan Everett turned the key in the lock, his jaw tight as he studied the young woman now gripping the bars of his only occupied cell. She was maybe 22, with dark hair that had come loose from its pins during her arrest, and eyes that blazed with righteous fury rather than the fear he usually saw in criminals. Something about her expression gave him pause, made his hand linger on the key ring as doubt crept into his mind. "I did not rob that stage," Helena said, her voice steady despite the tremor he could see running through her hands. "I was traveling to meet my aunt in town. I have never stolen anything in my entire life." "The driver identified you," Ethan replied, though even as he spoke the words, they sat uneasy in his gut. "Said you were one of 3 riders who held them up at gunpoint 5 miles outside town, took nearly $800 and shot one of the passengers in the arm." "Then the driver is mistaken or lying," Helena shot back, stepping closer to the bars. "I arrived on the afternoon train from Omaha yesterday. I spent last night at the Golden Prairie Hotel. Mrs. Henderson at the front desk can confirm it. The robbery happened this morning at dawn, did it not?" Ethan had to admit she had a point. The timing did seem off. The stage had been robbed at first light, around 5 in the morning, and Mrs. Henderson had mentioned seeing a young woman having breakfast in the hotel dining room around 6:30. But the driver had been adamant, practically shouting his identification when they had brought Helena in for questioning after she had been spotted near the general store. "I will look into it," Ethan said finally. "But until I can verify your story, you stay here." "How convenient for the real criminals," Helena said bitterly. "While you keep an innocent woman locked up, they are probably halfway to Colorado with that money." Ethan did not respond, just walked back to his desk in the front office of the jailhouse. But her words gnawed at him as he sat down and pulled out the report he had taken from the stage driver, a man named Pete Carlson who worked for Wells Fargo and had been running this route for 3 years. Pete had seemed certain, but Ethan had learned in his 6 years as sheriff of North Platte that certainty and truth were not always the same thing. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows as Ethan reviewed the case details. 3 riders, all wearing bandanas over their faces. One had been a woman, Pete insisted, based on the build and the voice when she had demanded the strongbox. But when pressed for more details, Pete had been vague. Said he had seen the woman in town later and recognized her clothes and her horse. Ethan stood and walked back to the cells. Helena was sitting on the narrow cot, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She looked up when he approached, and he noticed how the light caught the gold flecks in her brown eyes. "What were you wearing during the robbery?" he asked. "I was not at the robbery," Helena said firmly. "But I was wearing this dress." She gestured to the simple green calico she had on. "It is the only dress I brought with me. The rest of my trunk is still at the hotel. And your horse?" "I do not have a horse. I came by train, as I told you." Ethan nodded slowly. "Pete Carlson said he recognized you by your dress and your horse, a bay mare with a white star on her forehead." "Then he is either mistaken or deliberately lying," Helena said. "Sheriff, I understand you have a job to do, but you are wasting time. The real criminals are getting away, and I am losing precious days I could be spending with my aunt. She is elderly and not in good health. That is why I came all this way." "What is your aunt's name?" "Dorothy Brennan. She lives on Maple Street, the house with the blue shutters." Ethan knew Miss Dorothy. She was indeed elderly, maybe 70, and she had been unwell lately. He had seen Doc Morrison heading to her place a few times in recent weeks. If Helena was telling the truth about being Dorothy's niece, that was easy enough to verify. "I will be back," he said, grabbing his hat from the peg by the door. The walk to Maple Street took 10 minutes. The July heat was oppressive, making his shirt stick to his back under his vest and badge. North Platte was growing fast now that the Union Pacific Railroad had established itself here back in 1866, but it still retained the rough edges of a frontier town. Saloons outnumbered churches, and trouble was never far away. Miss Dorothy answered his knock, leaning heavily on a cane. Her face lit up when she saw him, then immediately creased with worry. "Sheriff Everett, is something wrong? Miss Dorothy, I need to ask you about your niece, Helena Brennan." The old woman's face went pale. "Helena, is she all right? She was supposed to arrive yesterday." "I have been worried sick when she did not come by." "She is in my jail, madam." "What?" Dorothy's voice rose to a near shriek. "That is impossible. Helena is the most honest person I know. What could she possibly have done?" "She is accused of being involved in a stage robbery." "But I am starting to think there has been a mistake." Ethan helped Dorothy to a chair in her parlor, then sat across from her. "Tell me about Helena. When did you last see her?" "Not for 5 years, since she was 17. She stayed with me that summer after her mother passed. Her father is a railroad man, always traveling. Helena has been living in Omaha, working as a school teacher. I wrote to her last month when I took ill, and she wrote back immediately saying she would come care for me." Dorothy fumbled for a handkerchief. "She is a good girl, Sheriff." "Whatever you think she did, you are wrong." Ethan believed her. Dorothy Brennan was many things, but a liar was not one of them. He stood, his mind made up. "I will get this sorted out, Miss Dorothy. Try not to worry." Back at the jailhouse, Ethan found his deputy, a young man named Tom Harris, waiting with news. "Found Pete Carlson at the saloon," Tom said. "Asked him some more questions about the robbery. His story has changed, Sheriff. Now he is saying maybe he was not so sure about the identification after all. Said he was shaken up and might have made a mistake." Ethan felt anger rise in his chest. He seemed plenty sure this morning when he was pointing fingers. "That is what I thought too, so I did some asking around. Turns out Pete has been in some debt lately. Gambling debts, mostly. Owes money to Jack Morrison." Jack Morrison was trouble, the kind of man who skirted the edge of the law without quite crossing it. He ran a poker game in the back room of the Silver Dollar Saloon, and more than one man had ended up beaten or worse when they could not pay what they owed. "You think Pete was in on the robbery?" Ethan asked. "I think it is worth considering. If Pete helped set up the robbery, he would need to point us towards someone else. A stranger in town, someone who could not defend themselves easily, would be perfect." Ethan cursed under his breath. "Get Pete and bring him here. I want to have a conversation with him." While Tom went to fetch the stage driver, Ethan returned to the cells. Helena stood when she saw him, hope flickering across her face. "I owe you an apology," Ethan said. "I should have looked deeper before locking you up. Your aunt confirmed your story, and my deputy has uncovered some information that suggests Pete Carlson might not be the reliable witness I thought he was." Helena's shoulders sagged with relief. "So you will let me go? Soon?" "I need to sort this out first, make sure I understand what really happened. But yes, I believe you are innocent." He pulled the key from his belt and unlocked the cell door. "You can wait in my office. It is more comfortable than this cell." "Thank you," Helena said softly as she stepped out. "I know you were just doing your job." "That does not excuse false imprisonment," Ethan replied. "I should have been more thorough." In his office, Helena sat in the chair across from his desk while Ethan put on a pot of coffee. He found himself acutely aware of her presence. the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the graceful line of her neck. He shook off the thoughts. She was a witness in a case, nothing more. Tom returned 20 minutes later with Pete Carlson in tow. The stage driver looked nervous, his eyes darting between Ethan and Helena. "Pete, I need you to tell me the truth about this morning," Ethan said, his voice hard. "And I mean the real truth, not whatever story someone paid you to tell." "I do not know what you mean," Pete stammered. "I think you do. I think you were involved in that robbery and you needed someone to take the fall. Miss Brennan here was convenient. A stranger, no connections in town except an elderly aunt. Easy target." "That is crazy," Pete protested, but sweat was beading on his forehead. "Is it?" "Tell me, Pete, how much does Jack Morrison have you into him for? 500? 1,000? Pete's face went white. "I did not have a choice. They said they would kill me if I did not help." "Who said that?" Ethan leaned forward. "Jack Morrison." "No, not Jack. 2 men who work for him. Cole and Hank Driscoll. Brothers. They planned the whole thing. Said they needed someone on the inside, someone who could tell them when a big shipment was coming through. When I tried to back out, they threatened me and my family. I have a wife, Sheriff. A little girl." Helena made a small sound of sympathy, and Ethan glanced at her. Despite everything, she looked more concerned than angry. "So you let them rob the stage, and then you were supposed to identify someone else as one of the robbers," Ethan said. "That about right," Pete nodded miserably. "They said to pick someone who looked like they could be a criminal. When I saw Miss Brennan near the general store, they were watching, told me to point her out or they would hurt my family. Where are the Driscoll brothers now? I do not know. They were supposed to leave town after the robbery, head west, but they wanted me to make sure the law was looking in the wrong direction first." Ethan stood, his mind racing. "Tom, take Pete into custody, charge him as an accessory, and send word to the marshal in Cheyenne that we are looking for Cole and Hank Driscoll in connection with armed robbery." "What about my family?" Pete asked desperately. "If the Driscolls find out I talked, they will come after them." "We will post a deputy at your house until this is resolved," Ethan assured him. "But you should have come to me in the first place instead of letting an innocent woman go to jail." After Tom led Pete away, Ethan turned to Helena. "I am truly sorry for what you went through today. I will make sure this is cleared from any records." "I appreciate that," Helena said. She stood, smoothing her dress. "I should go see my aunt. She must be beside herself with worry." "Let me walk you there," Ethan offered. "It is the least I can do." They walked together through the dusty streets of North Platte, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The town was busy with the evening crowd, cowboys from nearby ranches coming in for supplies and entertainment, railroad workers finishing their shifts, families out for evening strolls. "How long were you planning to stay in North Platte?" Ethan asked as they walked. "As long as my aunt needs me," Helena replied. "I took a leave from my teaching position in Omaha. The school board was understanding when I explained the situation." "That is good of you." "Not many young people would put their lives on hold like that." Helena glanced at him. "Family is important, Sheriff. My aunt took care of me when I had no one else. It is my turn to care for her." They reached Dorothy's house, and the old woman nearly wept with relief when she opened the door and saw Helena standing there. "Oh, thank heavens," Dorothy cried, pulling Helena into a fierce embrace. "Sheriff Everett, thank you for bringing her home." "It was my mistake that took her away," Ethan said. "I am just glad I could make it right." That night, lying in bed in his small house on the edge of town, Ethan could not stop thinking about Helena Brennan. Not just about the injustice she had suffered, though that weighed heavily on him, but about the grace with which she had handled it. No hysterics, no demands for retribution, just quiet dignity and concern even for the man who had falsely accused her. It was a rare quality, and it had made an impression on him. Over the next few days, Ethan threw himself into tracking down the Driscoll brothers. They had indeed fled west, but they had made mistakes, spent some of the stolen money in recognizable gold coins in a saloon in Sydney, about 70 miles away. The marshal there wired back that he had them in custody and would be sending them back to North Platte for trial. Ethan found himself with time on his hands, and he kept thinking of reasons to walk past Dorothy Brennan's house on Maple Street. He told himself he was just checking to make sure the Driscolls did not have any associates who might cause trouble, but the truth was harder to ignore. He wanted to see Helena again. On the 4th day after her release, he finally worked up the courage to knock on Dorothy's door. Helena answered, wearing a simple blue dress with an apron over it. There was a smudge of flour on her cheek, and she smiled when she saw him. "Sheriff Everett." "Is there news about the case?" "The Driscoll brothers have been apprehended," Ethan said, holding his hat in his hands. "They will be brought back for trial. Pete Carlson is cooperating in exchange for a lighter sentence." "That is good news," Helena said. "I am glad justice will be served." "I was wondering," Ethan began, then paused, suddenly nervous in a way he had not been since he was a young man courting his first sweetheart. "Would you allow me to take you to dinner, as an apology for the trouble I caused you?" Helena's smile widened. "You have already apologized, Sheriff. But I would be happy to have dinner with you." They arranged to meet the following evening at the Prairie Rose restaurant, one of the nicer establishments in town. Ethan spent an embarrassing amount of time deciding what to wear, finally settling on his best shirt and vest, his badge polished to a shine. Helena was waiting when he arrived, wearing a dress the color of deep wine that brought out the warmth in her complexion. Her hair was pinned up elegantly, and Ethan found himself momentarily speechless. "You look beautiful," he managed finally. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself, Sheriff. Please call me Ethan." Over dinner they talked easily. Helena told him about her work as a teacher, the children she missed back in Omaha, her dreams of someday having her own school. Ethan found himself sharing things he rarely spoke about. His childhood on a farm in Iowa, his decision to become a lawman after his father was killed by outlaws, his commitment to bringing order to the chaos of the frontier. "It must be difficult," Helena said, "carrying that responsibility every day, knowing that people's lives depend on the decisions you make." "It is," Ethan admitted. "And I do not always get it right, as you unfortunately experienced firsthand, but I try to do better, to learn from my mistakes." "That is all anyone can do," Helena said gently. "We are all human, Ethan. We all make mistakes." As they walked back to Dorothy's house after dinner, the stars brilliant overhead in the clear Nebraska sky, Ethan felt something he had not experienced in a long time: hope. Hope that maybe life held more than just work and duty, that maybe there was room for something else, someone else. "I would like to see you again," he said as they stood on Dorothy's porch. "If you would like that too." "I would," Helena replied, her eyes meeting his. "I would like that very much." The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness that Ethan had not anticipated. He and Helena saw each other nearly every day, sometimes for dinner, sometimes for walks along the Platte River, sometimes just sitting on Dorothy's porch talking while the old woman dozed in her rocking chair nearby. They talked about everything: their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Helena told him about losing her mother to fever, about the loneliness of being raised by a father who loved her but was never there. Ethan told her about the weight of the badge, about the lives he had saved and the ones he had failed to save, about the nightmares that sometimes woke him in the dark hours before dawn. "You carry too much," Helena said one evening as they sat by the river, watching the water flow past. "You cannot save everyone, Ethan. You cannot prevent every tragedy." "I know," he replied, "but I have to try." She took his hand, her fingers warm against his. "Just do not forget to live your own life in the process. You deserve happiness too." The Driscoll brothers arrived back in North Platte under armed guard in mid-August, and their trial was set for September. Ethan had to testify, as did Pete Carlson and several other witnesses. The evidence was overwhelming, and the jury took less than an hour to return guilty verdicts. The judge sentenced both brothers to 20 years in the territorial prison. After the trial concluded, Ethan felt as though a weight had been lifted. Justice had been served, and Helena's name had been completely cleared. The whole town now knew she was innocent, and several people had gone out of their way to apologize to her for believing the accusations. But as September turned to October, and the leaves began to change color, Ethan began to worry about something else entirely. Helena had been in North Platte for 3 months now. Dorothy was doing much better. Her health improved with her niece's careful nursing. Soon, Helena would have no reason to stay. She would return to Omaha, to her teaching position and her life there, and Ethan would be alone again. The thought was unbearable. On a crisp October evening, with the first hint of frost in the air, Ethan asked Helena to take a walk with him. They ended up at the small church at the edge of town, its white steeple stark against the darkening sky. "I need to tell you something," Ethan said, his heart pounding so hard he thought she must surely hear it. "These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. I wake up every morning thinking about seeing you, and I go to sleep every night grateful for the time we had together that day. I know we have not known each other long, but I also know that what I feel is real and true." Helena was looking at him with wide eyes, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "I love you, Helena," Ethan continued. "I think I started falling in love with you that first day when you stood in that jail cell and refused to let injustice break your spirit. I know you have a life in Omaha, and I have no right to ask you to give that up, but I am asking anyway. Stay here. Stay in North Platte. Stay with me." For a long moment, Helena did not speak, and Ethan felt his heart sink. Then she smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Ethan, I love you too. I have been dreading the day I would have to leave, dreading the thought of going back to a life without you in it. Yes, I will stay. Nothing would make me happier." Ethan pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the pent-up longing and love he had been holding back. She kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands gripping his jacket, and for that perfect moment, the whole world was just the two of them. They were married 3 weeks later in that same church, with Dorothy sitting in the front pew wiping happy tears from her eyes. The whole town turned out for the celebration, even those who had initially believed Helena guilty. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat, and through it all, Ethan kept looking at his wife, hardly able to believe his good fortune. "You are staring," Helena whispered to him during one of the dances. "I cannot help it," he replied. "I keep thinking I am going to wake up and find this was all a dream." "It is real," she assured him, standing on her toes to kiss his cheek. "We are real, and we have the rest of our lives to prove it." They moved into a house on the main street of town, a modest but comfortable place with room for a growing family. Helena took a position at the local school, teaching the older children, and quickly became beloved by her students and their parents. Ethan continued his work as sheriff, but he found that having Helena to come home to made the difficult days bearable, and the good days even better. Their first winter together was harsh, with snow piling up in drifts higher than a man's head and temperatures that made it painful to breathe. But inside their little house, There was warmth and laughter. They spent long evenings by the fire, Helena reading aloud from books while Ethan whittled or mended tack, their feet tangled together under a shared blanket. "Tell me a story," Helena said one night in late January as the wind howled outside. "What kind of story?" Ethan asked, setting aside the piece of leather he had been working on. "A happy one. Something that ends well." Ethan thought for a moment, then began. "Once upon a time, there was a foolish sheriff who arrested an innocent woman for a crime she did not commit." "This does not sound like a happy story," Helena interrupted with a smile. "Wait for it," Ethan said. "The sheriff realized his mistake and set the woman free. And then, because he was not completely foolish, he fell in love with her. And she, for reasons he will never fully understand but will be grateful for every day of his life, fell in love with him too. They got married and lived happily ever after." "I like that story," Helena said softly. "Though I think the woman had very good reasons for falling in love with the sheriff. He was brave and honest and kind, and he admitted when he was wrong and tried to make it right. Those are rare qualities in a man." "You are too generous," Ethan said, pulling her closer. "I am simply honest," Helena replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Ethan Everett." "I love you too, Helena Everett." Spring came, and with it new life. Dorothy's health continued to improve, and she spent more and more time visiting with her friends and neighbors. Helena's garden began to flourish, vegetables and flowers alike thriving under her care. And Ethan found himself thinking about the future in ways he never had before. "I want children," he said one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "I never really thought about it before, but now I find myself imagining what our children would look like, whether they would have your eyes or mine, whether they would be stubborn like you or stubborn like me." Helena laughed. "I am not stubborn. You absolutely are. It is one of the things I love most about you." "Well then, you are in luck," Helena said, taking his hand and placing it on her stomach. "Because in about 6 months you are going to meet someone who is probably even more stubborn than both of us combined." It took Ethan a moment to understand what she was saying, and when he did, his face broke into the widest smile Helena had ever seen. "You are having a baby?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. "We are having a baby," Helena corrected. Ethan whooped with joy, picking Helena up and spinning her around until she was laughing and begging him to put her down. That night, they lay in bed talking about names and nurseries and all the ways their lives were about to change. The summer was busy. Ethan threw himself into preparing for the baby, building a cradle from oak wood and painting the spare room a cheerful yellow. Helena sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands moving with practiced skill even as her belly grew round. Dorothy was beside herself with excitement, telling everyone who would listen that she was going to be a great aunt. She spent hours knitting booties and caps, each one more elaborate than the last. "I never thought I would live to see this day," Dorothy confessed to Helena one afternoon as they sat together in the garden. "When your mother died, I worried so much about you growing up without her. And then when you came here and ended up in jail on your first day, I thought my heart would break. But look at you now. Married to a good man, starting a family of your own. Your mother would be so proud." Helena blinked back tears, hormones making her more emotional than usual. "I wish she could be here to meet her grandchild." "She will be here," Dorothy said firmly. "Maybe not in body, but in spirit. And she will be so happy to see how well you have done, how strong and brave you have become." On a warm November evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Helena went into labor. Ethan paced the hallway outside their bedroom while Doc Morrison and Dorothy attended to Helena, every cry of pain making him flinch and wish he could take her place. "This is the worst part of becoming a father," Tom Harris said, having been summoned to keep Ethan company. "The waiting and the worrying and the feeling completely useless." "How did you stand it when your wife had your son?" Ethan asked. "Whiskey helped," Tom admitted. "But mostly just remembering that women have been doing this since the beginning of time, and they are a lot stronger than we give them credit for." It was nearly midnight when Doc Morrison finally opened the bedroom door, his weathered face creased in a smile. "Congratulations, Sheriff. You have a daughter, and your wife is asking for you." Ethan rushed into the room, all his fears evaporating when he saw Helena propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of Dorothy's hand-knitted blankets. "Come meet your daughter," Helena said softly. Ethan approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. Helena pulled back the blanket, revealing a tiny red face with a button nose and a shock of dark hair. "She is perfect," Ethan whispered, reaching out to touch one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb, and he felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "We need to name her," Helena said. "What do you think of Emma, after your mother?" "Emma Brennan Everett," Ethan said, testing the name. "It is perfect. She is perfect." "You are perfect." He leaned down to kiss Helena's forehead. "Thank you for this gift. Thank you for everything." The years that followed were full and rich. Emma grew into a curious, energetic child with her mother's intelligence and her father's sense of justice. She could often be found following Ethan around town when he made his rounds, asking endless questions about why people did bad things and how to make them stop. 2 years after Emma's birth, Helena gave Ethan another daughter, Grace, who was quieter and more thoughtful than her older sister but no less loved. And 2 years after that, their son Everett Jr. was born, a boisterous baby who seemed to cry more than he slept for the first 6 months of his life. Their house was loud and chaotic, and full of love. Ethan had never been happier, even on the days when he was so tired he could barely keep his eyes open, even when money was tight and he worried about providing for his growing family, even when the job brought him face to face with the darker side of human nature. Because through it all, he had Helena, his partner, his love, his anchor in stormy seas. She taught their children to read and write. She nursed them through fevers and nightmares. She made their house a home with her warmth and laughter and unwavering strength. Dorothy lived to see all 3 of her great nieces and nephews born, and she passed peacefully in her sleep on Emma's 5th birthday, her hand held by Helena. They buried her in the church cemetery under an oak tree, and Emma insisted on leaving wildflowers on her grave every week. "Great Aunt Dorothy liked flowers," Emma explained seriously to her siblings. "She told me once that flowers were like happiness. You have to plant them and take care of them, and then they bloom and make everything beautiful." North Platte continued to grow and change around them. The railroad brought more people, more businesses, more opportunities. The town that had been rough and wild when Ethan first became sheriff began to settle, to civilize. There was talk of paving some of the streets, of building a proper school building, of bringing in electric lights. "It is strange," Ethan said one evening as he and Helena sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. Emma was 8 now, Grace was 6, and young Everett was 4. "I spent so many years trying to bring order to this town, and now that it is finally happening, part of me misses the wildness of it." "You do not miss the danger," Helena corrected. "You miss feeling like you were building something, being part of something bigger than yourself." "But you are still doing that, Ethan. Every day you go out there and keep people safe, you are building the future, our children's future." "When did you get so wise?" Ethan asked, pulling her close. "I married a good teacher," Helena replied with a smile. As the children grew, they took on more of their parents' characteristics. Emma had Helena's quick mind and love of learning, but she also had Ethan's protective instincts. She was always the first to stand up for the smaller children at school, the first to volunteer to help when someone was in need. Grace inherited her mother's gentle nature and her father's keen observation skills. She noticed things others missed. The neighbor who was walking with a limp, the stray dog that was getting thinner, the friend who was quieter than usual. And she always tried to help, bringing food to the neighbor, leaving scraps for the dog, sitting with the quiet friend until they felt ready to talk. Young Everett was pure energy and mischief, always climbing something he should not climb, always asking questions that had no good answers, always making everyone laugh with his antics. But underneath, the mischief was a good heart, and Ethan saw glimpses of the man his son would become. One afternoon in the spring of Emma's 10th year, Ethan came home to find his eldest daughter sitting on the porch steps with tears streaming down her face. He immediately sat beside her, his protective instincts flaring. "What happened? Did someone hurt you?" Emma shook her head. "No, nothing like that. We were learning about the American Revolution in school today, and Miss Patterson told us about how some people were put in prison for things they did not do, how the British soldiers would arrest colonists without proof. And it made me think about how Mama was arrested when she first came here, how she could have been convicted even though she was innocent. And it scared me, Papa. It scared me that bad things can happen to good people even when they have done nothing wrong." Ethan put his arm around his daughter, his heart aching at her distress. "You are right, Emma. Bad things do happen to good people sometimes. The world is not always fair, but that is why we have laws and courts and people who dedicate themselves to seeking justice. It is not a perfect system, but we keep trying to make it better." "But you arrested Mama," Emma said, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. "You are a good person and you still made a mistake." "I did," Ethan admitted. "And it is one of the biggest regrets of my life, that your mother had to suffer because I did not investigate thoroughly enough before taking action. But I learned from that mistake, Emma. I became more careful, more thoughtful. And I met your mother, fell in love with her, and we created this beautiful family. Good can come from bad situations if we let it, if we learn and grow and try to do better. I want to be like you when I grow up," Emma said. "I want to help people and protect them and make sure innocent people do not get hurt." "You can be anything you want to be," Ethan told her. "And whatever you choose, I will be proud of you." That evening, after the children were in bed, Ethan told Helena about the conversation. She listened quietly, her head resting on his shoulder. "She is so much like you," Helena said. "She has your sense of right and wrong, your need to protect others." "She has your compassion," Ethan countered. "Your ability to see the humanity in everyone, even those who have made mistakes." "She is the best of both of us," Helena said. "They all are." As the 1880s progressed, Ethan found himself thinking about the future more and more. He was in his 40s now, and while he was still capable of doing his job, he knew he would not be able to be sheriff forever. He began training a new deputy, a young man named Samuel who had the right combination of toughness and compassion that the job required. "What will you do when you retire?" Helena asked him one night. "I cannot imagine you sitting idle." "I have been thinking about that," Ethan admitted. "Maybe I could teach, share what I have learned with the next generation of lawmen, or maybe I could just spend more time with my family, watch my children grow up, spoil my grandchildren when they come along." "Grandchildren," Helena said with a laugh. "Let us not rush things. Emma is only 12. But time had a way of moving faster than expected. Emma grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's grace and her father's determination. She announced at 16 that she wanted to be a lawyer, to defend those who could not defend themselves, and Ethan could not have been more proud. She went off to study in Omaha, working as a clerk in a law office while she read law books and prepared for the bar examination. Grace discovered a talent for medicine, helping Doc Morrison with his rounds and studying everything she could about healing. She had a gentle touch with patients and a mind that could diagnose problems others missed. Doc Morrison said she was the best apprentice he had ever had, and he was confident she would carry on his practice when he retired. Young Everett surprised everyone by falling in love with teaching. He started helping out at the school when he was 15, working with the younger children, and discovered he had a gift for making learning fun. He talked about opening a school of his own someday, a place where every child would feel welcome and valued. "We did good," Ethan said to Helena on their 20th wedding anniversary. They were sitting on the porch of their house, gray creeping into their hair but their love as strong as ever. "Look at what we built together. Look at the people our children are becoming." "We did very good," Helena agreed. "Though I think we had excellent raw material to work with," Ethan laughed. "That is true. 3 pretty amazing kids, if I do say so myself." "I was talking about us," Helena said, poking him in the ribs. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over North Platte. The town had electric streetlights now, and the sound of automobiles was becoming more common, though horses still outnumbered them. The world was changing, moving forward, and Ethan was content to move with it. "Do you ever think about that day?" Helena asked suddenly. "The day you arrested me?" "Sometimes," Ethan admitted. "Usually when I am lying awake at night thinking about all the what-ifs. What if I had not arrested you? What if you had left town before I realized my mistake? What if you had hated me for what I did and never given me a chance?" "But none of those things happened," Helena said, taking his hand. "You arrested me, yes, but you also freed me. You investigated when you could have just accepted the easy answer. You apologized when you could have just moved on. And you loved me when you could have kept yourself closed off. Every choice you made after that initial mistake was the right one." "I got lucky," Ethan said. "Lucky that you were willing to forgive me. Lucky that you saw past what I did to who I was trying to be." "Not luck," Helena corrected. "Love. We fell in love, and love has a way of overcoming obstacles that seem insurmountable. That day in the jail cell when you came back and said you believed me, that was the moment I started to see you as more than just the sheriff who arrested me. I saw a man who was willing to admit his mistakes, to seek the truth even when it was uncomfortable. And that was the man I fell in love with." Ethan pulled her close, kissing her with all the tenderness and passion that 20 years of marriage had not dimmed. "I love you, Helena Everett. I loved you then, I love you now, and I will love you until my last breath. And I love you, Ethan Everett. Always have, always will." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. Emma passed the bar examination and opened her own law practice in North Platte, becoming the first female attorney in the region. She built a reputation for taking on difficult cases, for defending those who everyone else had given up on, and Ethan saw in her the same passion for justice that had driven him throughout his career. Grace earned her medical degree through a correspondence program and apprenticeship with Doc Morrison, becoming Dr. Grace Everett and taking over his practice when he retired. She married a kind railroad engineer named Thomas, and they had 2 children, making Ethan and Helena grandparents for the first time. Young Everett opened his school, just as he had dreamed, and it quickly became known as the best educational institution in the region. He married one of his fellow teachers, a woman named Sarah who shared his passion for educating children, and they had 3 children of their own. Ethan retired from his position as sheriff when he was 55, turning over the badge to Samuel, who had learned well and was ready to lead. Ethan found that he did not miss the work as much as he had feared. Instead, he threw himself into his new role as grandfather, spending hours with his grandchildren, teaching them to ride, to fish, to whittle, to see the wonder in the world around them. Helena continued teaching for several more years before she too retired. She filled her days with raiding, gardening, and spoiling her grandchildren. She and Ethan took long walks together every evening, still talking about everything and nothing, still finding new things to learn about each other even after all these years. On a warm summer evening in 1895, the entire family gathered at Ethan and Helena's house for a celebration. It was Emma's birthday, her 31st, and the house was full of children and laughter and the smell of Helena's cooking. Ethan stood on the porch, watching through the window as his children and grandchildren filled every room and felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. "What are you doing out here all alone?" Helena asked, coming to stand beside him. She was 63 now, her hair completely gray, her face lined with years of laughter and living. To Ethan, she had never been more beautiful. "Just thinking," he replied, putting his arm around her. "Thinking about how lucky I am, how different my life would have been if I had never met you." "You would have been fine," Helena said. "You would have been a good sheriff, would have served this town well. Maybe. But I would have been alone, and I would have missed out on all of this." He gestured to the house full of their family. "Every good thing in my life came from you, Helena. Our children, our grandchildren, the happiness we have built together. All of it came from the day I was foolish enough to arrest you and smart enough to realize my mistake." "I suppose we should thank Pete Carlson," Helena said with a wry smile. "If he had not falsely accused me, we might never have met." "That is a generous way of looking at it," Ethan said. "Though I heard he got out of prison last year, moved to California to start over. I hope he learned something from the experience." "I hope so too," Helena said. "Everyone deserves a second chance, a chance to learn from their mistakes and become better." "Like I got," Ethan said quietly. "Like you got," Helena agreed, rising on her toes to kiss him. "And like I got. I could have let that experience make me bitter, make me distrust everyone. But instead, I chose to forgive, to love, to build a life. We both made the choice to turn something bad into something beautiful." Inside, someone called for them to come in, to join the party. They walked in together, hand in hand, and were immediately surrounded by family. Emma was showing off her latest courtroom victory. Grace was discussing a complicated medical case with interest. Young Everett was telling a funny story about one of his students, and the grandchildren were running around playing tag. As dinner was served and toasts were made, Ethan looked around the table at all the faces he loved, and he felt the weight of the years in the best possible way. Every moment had led to this, every choice and every chance, every mistake and every redemption. The foolish decision to arrest an innocent woman had somehow become the best thing that ever happened to him, not because the decision was right, but because it had led him to Helena, and Helena had led him to this life, this family, this joy. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Ethan and Helena lay in bed together, her head resting on his chest, his fingers trailing through her hair. "Thank you," Ethan whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Helena asked sleepily. "For forgiving me, for loving me, for building this life with me, for every single day we have had together." Helena lifted her head to look at him, her eyes soft in the moonlight streaming through the window. "You never have to thank me for loving you, Ethan. Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done. You are a good man, a good husband, a good father and grandfather. You made a mistake once, yes, but you spent every day after that making up for it, being the man I knew you could be. That is all anyone can ask." "I do not know what I did to deserve you," Ethan said. "You fought for justice," Helena replied, "even when it meant admitting you were wrong, even when it would have been easier to let an innocent woman take the fall for someone else's crime. You put truth above your pride, and that is the mark of a truly good man." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, as they had done for 30 years, as they would do for however many years they had left. And in the morning, they would wake up together, would share coffee on the porch and watch the sun rise over North Platte, would spend another day in the life they had built from the ruins of a false accusation and a sheriff's determination to make things right. The seasons turned, years flowing one into another like water in the Platte River that had given the town its name. More grandchildren were born, and eventually great-grandchildren. Emma became one of the most respected attorneys in Nebraska, known for her fierce defense of the innocent and her unwavering commitment to justice. Grace's medical practice grew, and she trained several young doctors who carried on her legacy of compassionate care. Young Everett's school became a model for education throughout the region, and students came from miles around to learn in an environment where they were valued and nurtured. Through it all, Ethan and Helena remained at the center, the heart of a family that had grown from their love. They celebrated birthdays and holidays, mourned losses and cheered triumphs, offered wisdom when it was sought and stayed silent when silence was needed. They were the foundation upon which 3 generations had built their lives, and they bore that responsibility with grace and humility. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the family threw them a celebration that filled the church social hall. People came from all over to honor the couple who had become pillars of the community, the sheriff who had admitted his mistake and the woman who had forgiven him, the couple whose love story had become legendary in North Platte. Speech. Someone called, and soon everyone was chanting for Ethan and Helena to say a few words. Ethan stood, his hair white now, his face weathered by years of sun and wind, but his eyes still bright with intelligence and humor. Helena stood beside him, still beautiful in her 7th decade, still the woman who had stolen his heart in a jailhouse office 40 years ago. "I am not much for speeches," Ethan began, and there was affectionate laughter from the crowd. "But I will say this. 40 years ago, I made one of the biggest mistakes of my life. I arrested an innocent woman for a crime she did not commit. It could have ended there, with an injustice that was never corrected, with a life ruined by my carelessness. But it did not end there, because I had the good sense to question my assumptions and the good fortune to discover the truth. And in discovering that truth, I found something else. I found the love of my life." He turned to Helena, taking her hand. "Helena, you could have left North Platte the moment you were freed. You could have hated me for what I put you through. Instead, you stayed, and you gave me a chance to prove that I was more than that one mistake. You gave me 40 years of love, of laughter, of partnership. You gave me 3 incredible children and more grandchildren and great-grandchildren than I can count. You gave me a life beyond anything I ever dreamed possible. And for that, I will be grateful every day until I draw my last breath." There was not a dry eye in the hall, and when Helena spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Ethan says I gave him all these things, but he forgets what he gave me. He gave me a home when I was alone and frightened in a strange town. He gave me justice when I had been wrongly accused. He gave me a love that has sustained me through every trial and triumph of the past 40 years. He gave me a family, a purpose, a life richer than anything I had imagined. We made mistakes, both of us, but we also made a life. And it has been a good life, a beautiful life, a life I would not trade for anything." They kissed then, to the applause and cheers of everyone gathered, and the party continued long into the night. Music played, children danced. Stories were told of Ethan's early days as sheriff and Helena's arrival in town. And through it all, the anniversary couple sat together, hands clasped, watching the life they had created swirl around them. As the years advanced further into the new century, Ethan's health began to fail. Nothing dramatic, just the slow accumulation of years taking their toll. His joints ached with arthritis, his breathing became labored after even short walks. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Helena never wavered. Helena herself remained remarkably healthy, still tending her garden, still baking pies for church socials, still the center of her large and loving family. But Ethan could see the worry in her eyes when she looked at him, could see her measuring each day they had together, treasuring every moment. "Do not mourn me before I am gone," he told her one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. "I am still here, and I intend to stay as long as I can." "I know," Helena said, but her voice broke. "I just cannot imagine my life without you in it, Ethan. You have been my partner, my love, my best friend for more than 40 years. How do I go on without you?" "The same way I would go on without you if our positions were reversed," Ethan said gently. "You remember the love we shared, the life we built, the children we raised. You find joy in the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. You live, Helena, because that is what we promised each other. To live fully, to love completely, to make the most of whatever time we are given." "I hate it when you are right," Helena said, wiping her eyes. "That is a lie," Ethan replied with a smile. "You love it when I am right. It happens so rarely." Helena laughed despite her tears, and they sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. It was one of hundreds of such sunsets they had watched together, but they both knew that the number of sunsets left was finite, was shrinking with each passing day. Ethan made it through another winter, though it was a hard one. The spring brought some relief, and he rallied enough to attend young Everett's oldest son's wedding in May. The whole family gathered, 4 generations of Everetts, all of them descended from a chance meeting in a jail cell so many years ago. "Look what we made," Ethan said to Helena as they watched their great-grandson exchange vows with his bride. "Look at all these beautiful people who exist because you gave me a chance all those years ago." "We made them together," Helena corrected. "Everything good in our lives we made together." That summer was a gentle one, warm but not too hot, with enough rain to keep everything green. Ethan spent most of his days on the porch now, too weak to do much else, but he was content. His children visited daily, his grandchildren came by whenever they could, and Helena was always beside him, reading to him, talking with him, just being present. On a warm August evening, as the cicadas sang their summer song and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Ethan felt a peace settle over him. Helena was dozing in the chair beside him, her hand resting on his arm, and he looked at her with all the love of 43 years. "Helena," he said softly, and she woke immediately, alert to every nuance of his voice. "I am here," she said, taking his hand. "I love you," Ethan said. "I have loved you from the moment you stood in that jail cell and refused to let injustice define you. I have loved you every day since. And I will love you beyond this life, into whatever comes next." "I love you too," Helena said, tears streaming down her face. "Always and forever, Ethan Everett." "It was a good life," Ethan whispered. "Thank you for sharing it with me." He closed his eyes then, his hand still holding hers, and he slipped away peacefully, leaving Helena alone for the first time in more than 4 decades. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of North Platte. Ethan had touched countless lives during his years as sheriff and after, and people came from miles around to pay their respects. Emma delivered the eulogy, speaking of her father's integrity, his courage, his unwavering commitment to justice and to his family. There was not a dry eye in the church. Helena stood at the graveside as they lowered Ethan into the ground, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and she felt the weight of his absence like a physical pain. But she also felt his presence, felt the love that had sustained them for so many years, and she knew that while he was gone from this world, he would never truly be gone from her heart. In the days and weeks that followed, Helena found her purpose in her family. She helped care for the youngest great-grandchildren. She advised Emma on difficult legal cases. She taught Grace's daughter medical remedies that had been passed down through generations. She tended her garden and baked her pies and lived, just as Ethan had asked her to do. But every evening she sat on the porch alone, watching the sun set, and she talked to Ethan as if he were still beside her. She told him about her day, about the funny things the children had said, about the changes happening in the world. And sometimes, when the light was just right, and the wind whispered through the trees, she could almost feel him there, could almost hear his voice telling her he loved her. Helena lived for another 7 years after Ethan's death, years filled with love and family and purpose. She saw Emma argue a case before the state Supreme Court and win. She saw Grace become a grandmother herself. She saw young Everett's school expand to serve 3 times as many students as it had when it first opened. And when her time came, on a peaceful spring morning with the windows open and the scent of lilacs filling the room, Helena closed her eyes and let go, ready to be reunited with the man she had loved for more than half a century. They buried her beside Ethan, and the headstone bore both their names and a simple inscription. He locked her up for a crime she didn't do. He cleared her name and kept her close. Together they built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. Years later, their story would still be told in North Platte, passed down through generations. The story of the sheriff who admitted his mistake and the woman who forgave him, whose love became the foundation for a family that spread throughout the region. Children would grow up hearing about Ethan and Helena, about how even the worst mistakes can lead to the most beautiful outcomes if we are brave enough to admit our errors and wise enough to forgive. Emma continued her law practice well into her 70s, becoming one of the most respected attorneys in Nebraska's history. She never forgot the lesson her father taught her that day on the porch steps, about how good people can make mistakes and how important it is to always seek the truth. She defended countless innocent people throughout her career, and more than once she prevented a miscarriage of justice, like the one her mother had faced. Grace built her medical practice into a small clinic that served the entire region, training dozens of doctors and nurses who went on to serve in communities across the state. She carried on her father's legacy of service and her mother's legacy of compassion, treating every patient with dignity and care regardless of their ability to pay. Young Everett's school became an institution, still operating decades after his death, still committed to the principle that every child deserves an education that values and nurtures them. His descendants continued to run the school, generation after generation, keeping alive the values he had learned from his parents. And all of them, every child and grandchild and great-grandchild and beyond, carried within them the legacy of Ethan and Helena Everett. The legacy of a love born from adversity, strengthened by forgiveness, and sustained by unwavering commitment to each other and to the family they built together. In the end, what began with a terrible mistake in a jail cell became a love story for the ages, a reminder that our worst moments do not have to define us, that redemption is always possible, and that love, true love, can overcome even the most difficult beginnings. Ethan locked Helena up for a crime she did not commit, but he also freed her, loved her, cherished her, and built a life with her that resonated through generations. It was a story of the Old West, of a time when justice was imperfect and life was hard, but also a story that transcended its time and place. Because at its heart, it was simply a story about two people who found each other against all odds, who chose love over bitterness, forgiveness over anger, hope over despair. And that story, that choice, made all the difference not just for them but for everyone who came after them. The porch where they had spent so many evenings still stood decades later, though the house had new owners. But on warm summer nights, when the cicadas sang and the stars came out, people said you could sometimes see two figures sitting there, holding hands and watching the sunset together, their love enduring beyond death, beyond time, a testament to the power of forgiveness and the strength of true love. And in North Platte, Nebraska, their story lived on, told and retold, a reminder that even in the wild and often unjust West, love could flourish, families could grow, and mistakes could be transformed into blessings. Ethan and Helena Everett had started with nothing but a wrongful arrest and a determination to make things right, and they had built from that beginning a legacy that would endure for generations. Their love story became part of the town's history, as much a landmark as any building or monument. And every time someone faced a difficult choice, every time someone had to decide between pride and humility, between anger and forgiveness, between giving up and trying again, people would remember Ethan and Helena. They would remember that the sheriff who made a terrible mistake became a man who spent his life making up for it, and the woman who was wrongly imprisoned became a woman who built a family and a legacy on the foundation of forgiveness. It was a love story, pure and simple, but it was also more than that. It was a story about redemption, about second chances, about the transformative power of admitting our mistakes and the healing power of forgiveness. It was about building something beautiful from broken pieces, about finding love in unexpected places, about creating a legacy that would outlast any individual life. And so the story ends where it began, in North Platte, Nebraska, in a time when the West was still wild and justice was still being defined. But unlike so many stories from that time and place, this one ended not with violence or tragedy but with love, with family, with generations of people who carried forward the values that Ethan and Helena had embodied: integrity, compassion, forgiveness, and above all, love. They had built a good life together, those two. A life that started in the worst possible way and became something extraordinary. A life that proved that our mistakes do not have to define us, that love can triumph over injustice, and that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected beginnings. Ethan locked her up for a crime she did not do, but in freeing her, in loving her, in building a life with her, he freed himself as well. And together, they created something that would endure long after they were gone. A love story for the ages, a family that would span generations, and a legacy of forgiveness and redemption that would inspire all who heard their tale.